Teaching to the test pattern.
Hey buddy, welcome to StreamSemester.com's Teaching to the Test Pattern. I'm Tom White, and today, starting a new series. As I kind of go through doing what I do, and I talk with a lot of teachers, I get a lot of questions that really are engineering questions. So I figured I'd go to the best engineer that I know, and that's Faraz Ahmed from Amitrace. They've been a supporter of Teaching to the Test Pattern and Stream Semester from the start for both of those. And Faraz, honestly, like anytime I have a question, he's my first phone call. So I say that not only because he's awesome and great, but because they do sponsor the program. If you are looking to upgrade your studio, your classroom, whatever you need, give him a shout. Amitrace.com. At the end of the show, he gives his email, he gives their the website again, but it's Amitrace.com. And this series is the first, like I said, of a new one called Ask the Engineer. We talk about some stuff that we get asked all the time. We answer some questions that we got from Camp T&I, and I'm really excited to share this with you. So without any further meanness, well, I guess it'd be me still because I'm on the actual show as well. But here's Faraz Ahmed from Amitrace and I in a new series we call Ask the Engineer. Today, and as we get started on this, the maiden episode of Ask an Engineer, just kind of tell everybody who you are, what you do with Amitrace.
Absolutely. So Faraz Ahmed, I own and operate the company. Family-run business. My dad started it 30 some odd years ago. A lot of folks I know you guys, so you probably have worked with us in the past before. My particular role is sales engineer. That's what I really focus on because I love technology and I love trying to figure out how we can make technology and workflows work together. So that's my primary role, but kind of do everything else in between too.
Excellent. And the reason we're starting this series is it's quite simple. As an educator, you don't really have a lot of time to really get into the weeds on, what is what when it comes to the engineering side. A lot of times it's what can I do to get my show or my production on the air, and that's really it. And what I want to do with this series is really dig in to different things that teachers should know or could know about what they're doing to really maximize their final product and their efforts. So when we were at Camp T&I, we sent teachers a link to ask some questions for our episode down there, and I cherry-picked some of those that we may or may not have gotten to down there to talk to you so that we can kind of build out a little bit more on that. And the first one is something that I get a lot, and it's one of those things that could be answered a million ways. What's the simplest setup for live streaming?
So I get that question a lot too, and people always typically want a little one-word answer, and it can be. It's just you want to define that a little bit more, right? Do we want to do multi-camera production? What exactly do we want to do? So you want to think about that. But the other thing I want to point out before we dive into some equipment ideas is that simple and cost-effective are not the same thing, right? They actually, honestly, typically work in opposite ways. They're inversely correlated. So kind of keep that in mind too. So one of the first ones I'm going to talk about here, simple, not incredibly flexible, just simple, right? And easy to use, easy to operate, easy to set up, and reasonably cost, but by no means like the cheapest way to do multi-camera streaming. The first product that I want to bring out would be there's a data video switcher, and I should have pulled these up so I can tell you the model numbers a little bit better. It's called the Mark II, and it's a mobile cast. And what's interesting about it, I'm trying to find the model number here. It's the HS1600T. It's about $5,500, and that's the switcher. And then you can get cameras with it too. The cool thing about this product is that it's all Ethernet based, not network or anything like that, but just point to point, meaning you hook up the network cable to the camera and then it goes directly to the back of the switcher. There is no configuration. There's nothing like that. And these are robotic cameras. The cameras, 3 cameras in that package will be about $10,000. But the nice thing is that's one clamshell. So when you open it up, the screen's right on there. You plug in your cameras. There's no configuration. Controls right there. You have very basic audio mixing, switching, streaming, and recording all on that one unit. nothing else required. Just provide power to the unit, and the unit will actually provide power to the cameras too. So via that one network cable, you get power, control, video, everything you need. So a very, very simple solution, and has a lot of flexibility. Have you worked with that at all, Tom?
I've not. I've worked with the competitors who there is a learning curve when it comes to knowing IP addresses and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's a very good thing, because if you don't know, if you don't know how to do IP, and you don't know how to get into a computer and adjust different IP ranges and cameras and inputs, that is a quite frustrating event. And the data video solution is pretty solid. I saw it not long ago. I haven't used it, but I did get my hands on it and touch it. And simplicity there in the fact that you're not having to build a control room. You're open up that clamshell, everything is there in one piece, and that over time saves days of work because every time you plug and unplug, you're running the risk of a mistake.
Exactly. And so, like, there's not a separate recorder, it's just built in, right? So you put an SD card and hit record. It has an HDMI input as well, so you could bring in a PowerPoint or ProPresenter or something like that. But it is what it is. It does exactly that. If it doesn't specifically state something it does, it probably doesn't do it. So it's excellent at what it does, but it only does those things. So if you're looking for the most powerful solution or the most flexible solution, that is not it. But it is one of the most simple ways to get streaming, and you really can train up once configured almost anyone in about 15, 20 minutes, honestly. There's just not much to it. Nothing to break.
So I mean, literally, it's a one-stop shop. You've got your switcher, your audio mixer, you've got your cameras, your camera controls, and that HDMI. Immediately, my brain runs 1,000 directions with that. That could be, if you wanted to use a graphics system where that keys off of an HDMI, or if you wanted to put a manually operated camera, you could run that in there as well, and you really have a pretty robust broadcast straight out of the box.
Exactly. It's a great solution. Just keep in mind that what you're paying for there is simplicity. And then the other thing I love about Dario is that it's a great company that supports their products, and they're pretty rock solid products. They're one of the few companies that offer a 3-year warranty, and their products just don't fail. My experience, their failure rate is less than 1%. It's a really solid company in that sense too. So I really like that. I've been very happy with their longevity, support, what they do there.
Excellent.
So that's one kind of area, right? The simplest way to do it. I don't know a ton right now. I just know I need to do this. I need a couple cameras. This is what we can do. So that would be one of the simplest ways. Now, in terms of more flexibility and affordability, you can start looking at the Blackmagic line. I think that makes a lot of sense. Simple in the sense that it's somewhat contained, but you're now building out a whole control room. And there are a bunch of different ADEM lines that you can look at. That's going to be a bigger conversation, maybe even a separate. I would say you could even do a separate podcast on all the Blackmagic switchers. But the one thing I would look at the Blackmagic switchers, the biggest thing that I seem to care about right now is make sure the one that you're looking at can take different input resolutions, that has cross converters on each input. There is no standardization across their product line. Each product is doing what that product is doing. So because product A is less and it does something, does not mean product B, even if though it's 3 times as much, will do that thing. They are using different bases to kind of build this stuff out. So really do your research, and then make sure each input can take cross convert, essentially, is what you're looking for. And that starts pretty affordable in that product line, but it's just worth it. I know you can play a lot of mental gymnastics to get around that. Don't do it. If you're going to buy a Blackmagic switcher, make sure each one cross converts. It's the most important feature.
For someone that doesn't know what the cross convert means, if you just pull cameras off a shelf, especially if students have used them, they're probably all going to be at different frame rates, different aspect ratios, different everything. The Blackmagic lines, and I'm not going to. Don't quote me on it, but it's the latest mini versions, and then you get into the HD8s and that kind of stuff. They all have it built in, and if you plug in something that's 720 at 50 frames a second, something that's 1080 at 30, it will mix those to your specs of your program, as opposed to you having to go back and in the original versions, you literally had to go in, make sure every camera was set exactly the same, or they wouldn't work.
And the issue with that, it's like, oh, I can match all the cameras, it's not a big deal. It's, oh, I want to bring a computer input in, or I want to bring in this other thing, or whatever. Just trust us on this. That particular feature is worth it more than everything else. And that was kind of one of my biggest gripes, because you would end up stuck at the end, where it's like, I can't do this for something that felt silly, and then you're adding converters. So the Blackmagic line has a lot of cool products in there. They all have streaming. I am so sorry. Find that. The Blackmagic product lines all have streaming, and they have a lot of flexibility, and they're definitely worth taking a look at. Pick your switchers based on your needs and what you need in terms of the inputs that you need and the resolution, cross conversion, and things like that. Make sure you don't get too caught up in 4K. 4K is great, but there are a lot of things on that. Unless you have to have 4K and you can tell me exactly why you have to have 4K, don't worry about it. You're gonna spend a lot of money and effort trying to figure all that out, and you're probably not gonna end up streaming in 4K. So that's not quite the answer you wanted. What else do you want from me, Tom?
Well, let's build off the Blackmagic as well.
Okay.
In that you can you buy, let's say you get something in the mini series, and they're this big to 19 inches, and you can buy accessories that put them in a clamshell and that kind of stuff. But you can also different things that as your program grows, you can add. You can add media players, and you can do those type things. When it comes to engineering for a live production, considering simplicity of setup, mobility, or just overall use, which do you think is probably the biggest concern for a teacher that's starting to get to go?
So when you're looking at streaming, what the problems that I typically see, there's two of them. One is the production aspect, right? Getting the content created. That's your switcher, your graphics, your cameras, all that type of stuff. We're talking about a bunch of different solutions. That's one kind of thing that you've got to figure out, and you've got to create a signal that you want to broadcast out, right? And we're going to talk more about that. The second thing that people fight with a lot is, how do I get this signal onto the internet, right? How do I get it onto my network? How do we get internet? Where are we streaming it? The configuration and things like that. It's all fairly simple steps, but there's just a lot of them, and each one has its own kind of tree branch. So first, break those two apart. Which one do you need to do? Do you have a signal? And then, do I want to get it streaming? And so in terms of getting it streaming, it's relatively easy from the encoding side, right? That's what you have to do. You have to encode the signal into some sort of RTMP feed or some sort of feed that can get out. The trickiest part that we typically run into is, will a school's network allow you to get the video on, and working with your IT department to do that? Now, there is a whole host of ways around this stuff that people have come up with. There is a lot of cellular bonding stuff where you can put cellular modems on there and work through that. Some of the Blackmagic solutions are offering that right off the bat. All great ideas. They all have a little bit of their own can of worms, right? You go out and stream and test it on a Thursday, it's going to work fine. Friday night during football game, you're probably hosed. But then at the same time, we've had a lot of success with it too. It just depends on what that mixture of that network is. And no one can really tell you until it's Friday night at 7:00. I don't care what people say. So I went on a whole tangent there. But in terms of those things that you're talking about, the biggest thing I would say is, if you're working in the Blackmagic world, which I think a lot of people will end up working in that world, if they're not working in the new tech world, I would see kind of, these are the three kind of I typically work in. If you're working in the Blackmagic world, make sure you stay in the Blackmagic world. That's where you're going to see success. If you don't feel like you can commit to staying in the Blackmagic world, then don't go down that path. Magic stuff really, really shines when you stay in their ecosystem. So, I mean, their cameras, their recorder, their switcher, their everything. And I know they all have their little limitations and quirks, but you have to accept all those, and you get a really valuable package out of it. When you start when you start mixing the stuff up, you start losing so much feature sets just left and right. It's really not worth it sometimes. So that's one kind of suggestion I have there, is stay in that ecosystem. The second thing, as you're designing this, is think about what you ultimately want and then work your way backwards, right? So like, if you want graphics, like you want to do scoreboard or whatever, figure out what that solution looks like and then work your way backwards. Because, for example, if you want that, there's really not a great way to do that with some of these other solutions. So you really need to mix and match and kind of figure out what makes sense and how to do it. I've kind of gone in every direction, Tom. So you want to put me back on track?
No, so what you're saying is find a lane, stay in it, but ultimately know where you want to go before you start. That ultimately we all want to be one of the 4-letter, 3-letter networks. But at the high school and small college level, the first step is to just do it. And just you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna fail. You're gonna have. I started streaming high school sports in 2011. The internet was barely capable of it at that point, and we had a lot of failures. And one of the things that you talked about getting connected and that kind of stuff, I always had someone who was my failsafe, who it was actually one of the girls' basketball coaches at our school, and she watched every broadcast. And she would just text me and go, "It's on." And that was it. Because at the time, you had no idea until you got back the next day and you got angry emails from somebody who couldn't watch. So with the live streaming, know where you want to go, figure out how to get there, but definitely stay in a lane. I think that's the best advice that I've heard on that topic in a long time.
One last thought. Let's break it down for them. So, someone that asked that question, if you really are a novice, right? And someone said, "Hey, I want to stream something, we want to get it out." Let's just break it down to the simplest way to do it, right? I would say start with one camera. Your first broadcast, let's keep it super simple. Be in the press box or wherever your network connection is with one camera. You can put the feed from the announcer or whatever you might have into an or directly into the camera, right? Because the camera will embed that, so you can hook it up via an 1/8 inch or XLR. You'll have to adapt it a little bit, but that might be the easiest way. And then from that camera, you want to get into some sort of encoder, right, to get it streaming. So one of the easiest ways to do it, honestly, would be one of the Blackmagic switchers, right? They are so cost effective, and that will allow for growth. So you can add the second camera at the next broadcast. So get a simple camera, whatever camera you have already. If you have HDMI or SDI, either connection type, match that up with the switcher that you get. And then the Blackmagic's one of the ATEM minis. And then essentially you're going to connect that to your network and stream out. That's all you essentially need, right? So if you already have a camera, probably HDMI based, then you can get one of the basic HDMI switchers. It'll connect to one of your computers so you can control it and configure it and so on and so forth. And then you can get out streaming. So if you want to find the most affordable way to do it, you should probably be looking at one of the simple ATEM minis. And frankly, the cost is so, I don't say negligible, but kind of. They can be a couple $100 that you can afford to do it for one season. You don't have to come up with the grand vision. You can experiment with that and go from there.
So when we're talking cameras, one of the things that I always make the point of is send cameras out that you can afford to lose. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But the little Canon Vixias, I don't even know if they make them anymore, that are about this big, flip out, they've got an HDMI out, they've got a screen, they've got a little bit of zoom. That's all you need to get started. No one's expecting ESPN quality out of the gate. And if you catch a foul ball to the camera, which I've had happen, or one get dropped from the press box to the ground, which I've had happen, it's not something that you're going to have to go to the school board to replace. It's one of those things that I highly, highly recommend is, as you get started, go with the most cost-effective, not cheap, but cost-effective camera that you can afford to lose, because you don't want to go out there with a $10,000 camera that, if it rains, or the worst part about that isn't the rain, it's a kid that doesn't know how to use it. Because you have it, it's a great day, it's a beautiful game, they don't know how to use it, you don't really know how to use it, it doesn't do you any good. And those little consumer level cameras adapt to light very well, especially football season. You're starting at bright sunlight at 7 o'clock and then it's dark by 10. How does your camera adapt? And those do a very good job of that.
1,000%. I can't tell you how many teachers want to take these giant cameras and take them out to their football game. And even at the high school level, and I kind of just, I don't think that's a smart idea to take a 10,000, 12,000, 14,000. It's just heavy, and getting it on the tripod. I mean, when I'm doing that personally for something, I'm trying to be cautious. And to expect kids to be able to, I mean, it's just heavy stuff. And that's the last part I'll just throw on this because I know we probably need to move. When you're making this equipment, think multiple boxes small. That's my recommendation. Everyone has different ways of doing it, but kids, can only lift so much, and the lighter they are, the more careful they will be. The heavier you have it, the more bang you got, the more everything, and the harder it becomes. So not one big box, but three smaller boxes is the way I like to do it. But Tom, I'd love your thoughts.
My piece of advice on that is, as you're getting started, if it can't fit in a backpack, you've got too much. You could fit an ATEM, a laptop, two of those small cameras, all of your cables in a backpack. That's all you need. If it can't fit in a backpack, you're doing too much to start. And that comes from when I started streaming, and James Dinsmore and I would literally load up 3 vehicles of equipment to go across town, and we would set up for 2.5, 3 hours to film 3 hours of basketball, then break it all down for another 2 hours and drive back. And the return on investment isn't there. We should have just gone, and of course this was pre-portable switchers. I remember when Blackmagic hit the market, I went, wait a minute. But literally, we were building an entire control room on the road every night, and it was more than we needed to do. Whereas a camera with a capture card or capture cable of some sort and a computer, we use the NFHS network, so we use their encoders, which had graphics. So we had literally everything we needed in a backpack with no problem. So I definitely think that that's good advice to keep it small.
I think that's an article right there, and that should be a mantra. Your first stream should fit in a backpack.
All right.
I cannot agree. I cannot agree with that more. Your first stream should fit in a backpack, and it should be as simple as possible. The only goal of the first stream is to get it on air,
Yeah.
and get all your ducks in a row. You don't want your first one to be stressful. It's going to be stressful regardless. You don't want your first one to be a failure, honestly.
Yeah.
You want your best chance of success.
And,
I love that.
And the stress piece is something that if it ever goes away, you're doing it wrong. Like I've done thousands of live broadcasts, and every time we go to hit go live where we are now, there's a little bit of nerves because something's going to break, and when it does, how you react to it determines how the kids will react to it. So,
I remember my first broadcast in like middle school. And I still feel those nerves, even when I'm doing a bigger production or whatever. Even if I'm doing like a little presentation on YouTube for Amitrace, it's there, and that's the fun part of it.
It really is. That's the addictive piece. I every year in my Facebook memories, I get the photo from our first live broadcast, and it was at Habersham Central, and their boxes literally, like, you couldn't stand 2 people in them. So James was running the camera, and I was sitting behind him with our computer on a trash can that was upside down, running graphics and scoreboard. And that was our first show, and I would hate to go look at it. I'm sure it was nothing award winning by any means. And then, over the years we had them all the time, and they would break or wouldn't work. And there were times where you just have to go, okay, well, we're not going to get a show today, and let's move on and go from there. So you talked about cameras for a moment. Want to dig in a little deeper on that. Another question I get regularly is, should your cameras that you use in the studio be the same that you use in the field? And that is the argument for it is everybody's using the same cameras. They know how to use it in and out. They don't have to learn new things. Obviously, there's an argument against it for the right use a hammer where a hammer is needed instead of a screwdriver. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, my gut is no, right? They're typically different. I think that where you would see them be the same is if it's a cost issue or something like that. But there's reasons they should be different. And frankly, hopefully you're teaching a skill, not the tool, they should be able to white balance on different cameras. And I know that's tricky as you're learning 3 million different things at the same time. But it is important to be able to adapt to different cameras, right? And those core things should be the same across the board. I think standardization is important, right? So if you have field cameras, they should all be the same field cameras. You should all have the same tripods, not 3 different brands of tripods. Even when a newer one comes out, right, and it seems hey, I should go with the newer one and not the older one. Stick with the same one, build that family of cameras. But I do believe the studio cameras and the field cameras should be different. In my brain, I kind of separate it out in three ways. Studio cameras, I try to put them in a studio configuration. I think the Blackmagic studio cameras are just an awesome deal. And what they provide, they also look good, which is a part of, in terms of just it looks like a studio camera, and the cost of them is just incredible. So they're just a win-win, and they have a great infrastructure. Those are the Blackmagic studio cameras. You've got the 4K and the 6K. They can have lenses added and things like that, and we're happy to build those out. Those are a great value. For field gear, you want to think, are you trying to do more film-like production, or are you trying to do more new style running gun type of production, right? If you're trying to do more new style where you just want to go and just record things and not think too much about it, then look at a camcorder like setup. And there's a lot of options there, all the way from the handy cams to you can do high end ones for a bunch of thousands of dollars. If you're going in down the film pathway, or want to do film like production, or really hey, let's really spend some time on getting the lighting right, white balance in the camera, finding focus, things like that, the pocket cinemas are a great value as well. You can also look at several DSLRs in that world, Sony's and all that type of stuff. But that DSLR type production, there's a bunch of good options there. But that's kind of where I would go. In the studio, I would definitely think about the Blackmagic studio cameras. Obviously, if you have more budget, then you can look at the Ursas or Sony or Panasonic. But you get that workflow for like a 20th of the cost of what Sony and Panasonic would cost. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you're talking about $2,000 or $3,000 versus $30,000. And the idea that you can teach them that workflow is pretty cool. And it's pretty easy. It's touchscreen, so on and so forth.
That's something that to just make sure that we touch on is that you said it, that the workflow is the most important piece. No matter what the equipment is, knowing how to white balance, knowing how to use the camera, and the cost differences between Blackmagic and their competitors are astronomical, but the product at the end of the line that goes to YouTube or wherever you're sending it, no one can tell the difference. That's the beautiful piece, especially in the education space, is that the $2,000 camera performs just as well as the others, and you don't have to worry. Again, you have students. You have look at how your students dress. They don't make good decisions. You don't want to put them in front of a camera that they could permanently damage. That's going to cost you to go to a board meeting to replace. And finding good equipment that gives a good final product that everybody can be proud of is really essential, and differentiating that. And the lines are kind of blurring a little bit with the live sports stuff, with shallow depth of field stuff. But really, that's the only area that line is blurring. And those again are being built out with a specific goal in mind.
And the other thing that goes kind of along with that is you just don't want to be nervous about your kids working with the equipment. You want to encourage them to go in there and mess it up, mess the settings, play with the settings and things like that, and know that, hey, I can probably get it back the way I need it to. And that's kind of some of the nice things about the pocket cinema cameras and those studio cameras. They're relatively simple. They don't have like a ton of switches. It's a touch screen. Like it does kind of what it does, and it's good to go there. There aren't like hundreds of settings buried in menus that you can't find. There are cons to that, but the pros are, you touch screen through it, you check a few things, and you're good to go.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, 90% of the time that we're working with students and cameras, it's the same thing they did yesterday, or the same. They're not going to be a director of photography on a school shoot. It's if it's broadcast or news based, it's let's go get this interview, let's get it cut, let's get it on the air, boom. If it's film based, it's let's get it set, let's get it shot, let's get it covered, let's get out. Because you're unlike the pros, you're in definitely tighter time constraints. Best case scenario, you have a 2-hour class. If you're in 55 minutes, I don't know how you make anything happen, but that finding that sweet point between the student's ability to use the gear and get an image out that matters is really important. So
Agreed.
One last question, and this one is the one that honestly, I'll get a call usually on a Thursday from a teacher panicking. All right, I'm at the stadium and I can't get signal. HDMI versus SDI. Um, the the most of the cameras that I see in school settings have HDMI, primarily because the price difference in a base HDMI camera versus a base SDI camera. What is the difference in the two in terms of signal and run length? Because when you get out to sports, that's where it really impacts the most, is the difference between HDMI and SDI.
Absolutely. And this is a fantastic question. All right, so let's break it down a little bit. HDMI and SDI are basically cables, right? And a signal is going across them. SDI has that BNC kind of round connector, right? And HDMI everyone's familiar with. Now there are different connection types, and you can adapt them out. So they're all running a signal across them. Typically, we do HDSDI, so a 1080p or a 1080i or 720 or whatever, and they can run across them. And so you can convert them back and forth because all you're really doing is changing the connection type. You're not really reformatting or anything like that. All right. So everything has HDMI. Why not just go with HDMI? The issue with HDMI is the run length. I don't like HDMI going very far. My goal is about 30 feet. After that, it's kind of the wild, wild west, depending on the cable type and as well as the camera output, right? So it's not just, oh, if I buy this really high-end cable, it's going to work or whatever. It's also about what the output of that camera or that output device is, if it's strong enough. And you simply do not know. I just see it vary. So very, very short distance. I mean, use 30, maybe 50 feet as your max. And repeaters and all that type of stuff, like in terms of passive ones, right? Things that don't have power, are degrading the signal even more. And that's true on any type of kind of cable type, right? SDI or HDMI. So if you're barrel connecting it, or if you are using a coupler, those are all extending it. So try to do one cable if you're worried about the signal showing up. With digital signals, HDMI and SDI are both digital signals, right? So SDI stands for what? Serial digital interface?
Yes.
Doesn't really matter, but there it is. So they're digital signals. So what I mean by both those things being digital is they don't get blurry like analog, right? So we used to think about it where like, hey, the longer the signal, the worse the signal is going to look. That's not true with SDI and HDMI. They're zeros and ones. So either the signal will be there or it won't be there. If it's going in and out or dropping frames, so basically like black flashes, that's the same idea. The signal's not strong enough. It's not making it. It's dropping frames. It's not getting all those zeros and ones. So the quality of cable in terms of improving the image quality, that's not really correlation. It's really about how far is that signal length going to go for you. So HDMI, like I said, I use 30 feet as kind of my threshold. You can push it. You can get solutions up to 100 and things like that, but I use 30 feet as my threshold. SDI can go about 100 meters or 330 feet. I use 300 feet as my thing. I'm not great at measuring stuff, so I stick with 300, and that gives me a little bit of leeway on which way to go. Now, that is based on a 720p or 1080i and the cable type, right? So you've seen a BNC connector for ages. You can use it to transfer all sorts of different stuff, audio, networking. I mean, it's just a cable type, right? It can, cable, anything can go over it. So the quality of cable does matter. What I'm referring to is a standard Belden type cable, 1855A or 1694A. You don't need to get into the weeds of the cable type. Just you want to use a good quality SDI cable, one that's rated for HDSDI. Using a Belden or a Conair, something like that, is a smart idea when you're trying to do long cable lengths. Shorter cable lengths won't matter. And you can test it right there. Just connect both ends and see if it works. It should be a stable signal. And what you're sending, again, does matter. So 4K is going to be a lot more data. And so it's going to require a better cable, and it's going to go a shorter distance. And that's where you're going to see 3G, 6G, and 12G. That's talking about how much data is going across that cable. So again, we're going into the weeds of all this stuff, but the takeaway really is if you can do SDI, that's a smart bet. If you can't, you're doing HDMI, go for smaller cable lengths. Try to avoid couplers and things like that. If you have to be HDMI and you need to go a long distance, get SDI converters. They're not terribly expensive. You've got Blackmagic converters as an option, HDMI to SDI, and then you've got decimators as an option as well. Um, I really like the decimator converters. They're worth the extra $50. The decimator LXs are about $100. They can be hard to get. We sell them and we actually lose a little bit of money on each one because they're companies based in Europe and we import it and all this stuff. So we lose a couple bucks on each one. Um, but it's still worth it. I really like their LX converters. Now, when you're looking at conversion, is it converting a signal or is it doing actual conversion of the signal? Not the signal, I'm sorry, the cable type, or is it actually doing like a cross convert? So what I mean by that is like, am I just converting this to HDMI to SDI or vice versa? Or am I actually taking a signal from HD to 720 or whatever? And that's where the higher end decimators come in handy. The HXs. The HXs have a lot more conversions and a lot more options. It's a little bit trickier to set up. The LXs are winners. If you're just trying to cross convert, go a long distance, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I've got an HX that we use to cross convert, and it's used currently for our prompters. So it cross converts and flips the screen. They're a little more pricey, but you can get a lot more out of them long term. But again, there's a learning curve with getting it there, and there's usually a lot of cuss words when you're trying to set it up.
So you tell me the truth on this. With the HXs, for some reason, I must be just stupid, I guess, but like I can't seem to set it up through the menus on the device. Only way I can ever really get and understand what the heck it's doing is when I connect it to a computer to configure it.
Maybe I should do the computer instead of the device because I typically do it on the device and it takes 3 times longer than I think it should, and I have to apologize for words that I say afterwards. So maybe I should try the computer.
Or maybe I should watch you do it on the device. I mean, I have tried it a handful of times, and I can't tell you how many times this is broken. This is a defective one. I haven't had a single defective one. They're always when I hook it up to the computer. So the HXs, again, this is one that can do signal cross conversion. They're great because you can take a 1080 signal and convert to whatever you want. But to configure it, you have to use the little buttons. It can be confusing. You can also hook it up to your computer via USB. There's a little app. It's actually very simple and straightforward, and then you can see what the heck it's doing.
Yeah, they're definitely when you get into those long runs, and I'm a big fan of SDI, and when you hear 300 feet, you go, wait, that's not long enough. Well, unless you're trying to do center field at a baseball game or softball game, you're right. But if you're trying to do down the lines, that's 200 feet past your bases. That's if you wanted to, you could literally set up on third base and run your cable around to first base. For football, you can go pretty wide. If you're on a press box, you can run it down and then to one sideline or the other, one into the field or the other. 300 feet's a long way, and that's something that a lot of people go, well, is that long enough? And again, other than center field at those bat and ball sports, and honestly, if you do it right, you could probably, especially softball, if you set up on the side, down past the base, you could probably split and get both or get a good enough for both. But the other thing, and if anyone's ever talked to me for more than 35 minutes about this type of thing, if you're in a situation where you can use NDI, then cable length doesn't matter. as long as you're on the same subnet and you're doing that, and again, that gets into that IT part, and you have to have those conversations with your IT people. What a beautiful tool NDI is when it comes to connectivity. We use it here a ton because we're broadcasting things from different floors, and I'm not having to run cables up and down floors. Talk a little bit about NDI just for somebody who's never heard of it before.
Absolutely. I want to reverse back real quick to that. If you need to go longer than 300 feet, people immediately start thinking fiber, which is an option. With kids, it's a tricky option. That's just what I think, because fiber is pretty fragile. But the other is kind of quick, simple solution is if you just need another couple hundred feet, is you can do something called reclocking the signal, which is basically just putting another converter or device in the middle of it. So that LX that I was talking about, that does a conversion, you can literally just plug it in and go out of it on the same thing. So it's not doing anything, but just what we say, reclock the signal. basically meaning you can go another 300 feet. So you could put it in the middle, and it can actually be powered via USB. And there you go. You got 600 feet now out of SDI cable. So that's another option that you can do. Again, another failure point, another amount of complexity. So this should not be your first or second or third broadcast.
Not at all. Not at all. That's
Yeah.
when anytime you're adding an adapter that isn't just to convert from one to the other, that's a different conversation. For really, honestly, your third year of broadcasting. If you're doing 10 to 15 games a year, maybe your third year you're now talking that. But before that, it's not worth your time.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And the same thing with fiber. So just make sure requirements are really your requirements. To me, the requirement should be having a good, successful broadcast. And that's what's going to make it run really well. In terms of NDI, let's talk about it. I love NDI. So let's do a little context. SDI, HDMI are point-to-point signals, right? You go from a camera to a monitor, from a camera to a switcher, so on and so forth. Each thing has to connect from one thing to another device. With NDI, you're kind of building like a hub where everything connects to a network, right? And then everything can access everything to each other. So think of it like your printer. You might not directly be connected to your printer, but your computer's connected to the network, the printer's connected to the network, everything can access it, so on and so forth. In theory, right? Printer's a whole nother conversation. But with NDI, the power that you get is you can basically have a hub and spoke model. You can plug in different devices on different on your network, and then everything can access everything. And so what I typically do if I was looking at it as a sports broadcast is I would typically just take my own little network switch and plug everything to that and not get on the school network initially. If I was doing a day one or a mobile broadcast or something like that, that's how I would start. I would also start with the Netgear 4250 switches. They're expensive. They're probably double the cost of what a standard switch would be, but they simply work. They have the configurations on there. They have the power requirements designed for what they want. They have the longevity of it. I've done the game of going with the lower end switches, and I just refuse to mess with it anymore. I just go with the 4250s, even when it's overkill. It's one less thing to mess with. And so if you are IT nervous, that's the way to do it. And you can do some learning. And the idea is that's going to stay completely separate from your school network. So at no point should that switch touch anything that's plugging into your school network. You will tick off a lot of people if you do that. Don't do it. That's wrong. You are causing chaos, and you are causing a liability. So if you do that switch, only your devices should be hitting it, and it should never be hitting anything that's with your school. And that's how you can do NDI with that. But NDI basically just gives you the flexibility, right? So you plug a camera into the switch, you plug in a TriCaster to the switch, or an NDI, another device, and everything can access everything. And so you get a lot of flexibility that way. Over time, if you start using your school network, like a lot of schools have, now this is where you have to get IT buy-in, have a long, drawn-out conversation with them, get their buy-in, do not work behind their back, do not force them to do it. They're going to make your life miserable. Get them to buy in. They're going to do it. We've got a lot of examples of schools doing it. IT has been fantastic to work with over the last few years across the board, across the Southeast. And they will help you get set up and kind of give you the limitations that you can work with, and then go from there. And so that will allow you to basically plug in a camera anywhere in your network, and you can do a central control room. The flexibility and the amount of content you can produce is just exponential. It's amazing what you can do there. So the idea becomes the central control room is that in your lab, you have a TriCaster or another NDI-like device, the switcher, and you can then plug in cameras in your commons area, football game, wherever, and you produce everything locally there. Incredible amount of flexibility. It is where the industry is headed. It can also be quite cost effective. But the trick to that is IT buy-in. And you want to get everyone brought in and get that conversation going. We have white papers and everything like that. Do not work around them. Work with them. Every time I've seen someone try to work around them, it just doesn't work. Simply, they will make sure it hoses.
Yeah, and there's always when NDI was coming out, I was really excited about it, and the security. There's no security concerns, and it really, once you get it up and going, the sky is the limit. Premiere, After Effects, those guys have NDI plugins. You don't even have, like, if you have a TriCaster or any kind of NDI input, you don't have to export a video anymore. You play it straight out of program from your Premiere or After Effects. You can screen capture if you're doing esports. Oh, it's so beautiful for esports because you can literally have every computer in your lab as an input into your device and available to switch. So those are the extremes. The other side of that is your principal's doing something in the commons area. You plug in a Ethernet cable to the wall and to a converter or the camera, depending on what you have. And if you have a PTZ camera with the right, the right specs, you can literally control it from your TriCaster or whatever device you're using in terms of pan, tilt, zoom, all of that, color, all through the line. So really, if you're in a situation where you have a theater that wants a lot of productions recorded, central control room, throw 3 or 4 cameras up against the walls, and you're not having to sit in there with crying babies and super excited moms. You could be in your studio punching buttons in quiet and not disturbed. So NDI is definitely something that if you're going to do big long term, you definitely need to invest in making that happen.
With NDI and the security things, the big thing I kind of just throw out there in its most simple form, is that, hey, we are not trying to go outside the school. This has nothing to do with your internet. Your internet could go out because all the NDI traffic is staying local, right? Your internet signal and your network are completely separate. So while you might have slow internet or it's saturated or whatever, it simply does not matter. That's where a lot of the security concerns come in too, right? Hackers coming in, something going out, so on and so forth. Again, NDI staying internal to your network. We don't need to open up a bunch of ports out to the world or anything like that. So think of it that way and try to explain it that way. Everything we're trying to do is staying inside. I'm not trying to take anything outside the network, and I'm not trying to bring anything from outside in. And most people get that and can understand why that's a lot less. There's a lot less concerns about security. Everything's staying internal.
And I will make sure that I link in the description where you and Philip and I had a conversation several years ago about NDI, and we did 4 or 5 episodes just on NDI because it really, if you are in a workspace where you can use it and you're not, you are really selling yourself. There's phone apps that will allow the camera to be a source in your TriCaster or whatever unit you're using. So you now have all the computers, all the kids, everybody can be an input into your system. There's a lot of ways to really manipulate that and make it a big deal for your program. So definitely look into that if you're in a workspace that's capable. But your IT buy-in has to be second to none. You have to go in and start with I know nothing. That's usually how I would start with I know nothing about this topic, but I want to do it, and that definitely plays out long term.
That's exactly, yes, all the above. And it's really cool stuff. And the other flip side of this is don't be afraid to play with NDI at your house. I mean, I know the last thing you probably want to do, but if you have a laptop or a computer at your home, that's not a school one, honestly, right? Because you don't want all those networks. You can play with it a lot at your home very, very easily. There's not a lot of configuration on a simple network. It's on the complex networks, there's more configuration. And so there's a whole NDI tool pack that's free, and you can then get your signal coming in. And there's all sorts of cool stuff you can do. And the easiest way to play with it is play with it at home on not a school laptop.
And to play with it at home, vMix accepts NDI, OBS accepts NDI. There's a ton of things. So you could literally go, hey, here I am on my phone, and it's on your computer. If you're doing, I don't know, a podcast and you want multiple angles of yourself, set up a couple of phones on some mini tripods, and you've got it all in those devices.
And then with that NDI tool pack that we're talking about, studio monitors in there, right? That allows you to see a signal. So I'm going to take a quick story, and then I know you probably need to wrap up, but asking you how they could get a remote iPhone camera into a Blackmagic switcher or something like that. I don't know if it was you or not, but it was really cool. All you could do is just throw up Studio Monitor on a laptop, right? Free. Use the iPhone app, free, and then just take the HDMI out of the laptop into the switcher, and now you've got an iPhone camera that you can use. And you could even switch between 2 or 3 of them by having Studio Monitor opened multiple times. So really play with the NDI tool pack. There is a lot of cool stuff in there, and you can play with it at home, and it's free. It's completely free.
Yeah,
on a PC. That's the big thing.
Yes.
Don't mess with NDI on a Mac until you understand the limitations of it. Just trust me. I'm a Mac guy. I love Macs. I'm working on a Mac. But when you're first exploring NDI, just keep it all PC for now.
That's an entire series there, the difference between Mac and PC when it comes to broadcasting. But yeah, NDI, when I left Morgan County, we had 3 cameras on NDI in our studio. We had our graphics and we had teleprompter running all via NDI. There were no cables running from my classroom into the studio. It was all over the network. And the only time we had a problem was we had a final one day, but that was an entire network outage, not just our stuff. So nothing we could do about that. Well, Faraz, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find you if they have any questions, and if they don't know, it's their fault at this point.
You can always, of course, get a hold of us through our website, www.amitrace.com. You can always email us as well, sales@amitrace.com, or you're welcome to reach out to me directly as well, Faraz@amitrace.com. I will say, if you reach out to sales, we'll make sure it gets covered. If you're a brand new person, you reach out to me, it can get buried in my email. So I do, if you reach out to sales, like I said, we'll promise we'll get it back to you. Please reach out. We love meeting new people. We love talking to new folks. People always think that we're worried about budget and things like that. We're happy to get you started. We're happy to kind of make you a client for life, right? Once we get you streaming, our goal is that we'll just keep growing it. And that's what we've seen time and time again.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and everything that you've done for education across the board and sharing what you have here. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Teaching to the test pattern.
I hope we answered a lot of your questions there in that episode, and we're going to do one of those every other month or so as we kind of go out and build new content for the show, honestly. So if you have anything that you'd like to get answered by Faraz or I, contact@streamsemester.com. Just in the subject line, ask the engineer, and we will do our best to get that. And if there's anything that we mentioned in the show, I put a link in the description. So make sure that if there's something that interests you, whether it's the Blackmagic products, it's the Roland products, or any of the stuff that we talked about, it's all there in the description below. So thank you again for taking the time to watch and/or listen. And as always, go out and make some awesome.